Canada just announced something that could change who controls nuclear energy for decades. While America was busy fighting Canada with tariffs and trade pressure, Ottawa was quietly preparing a move that could make Canada a much bigger force in global nuclear fuel and leave Washington facing a supply problem it may not be ready for. Ottawa's new nuclear energy strategy calls for expanding uranium production and turning Canada into a much stronger global supplier of nuclear fuel, right as it locks in a massive new customer in India. Canada is already the world's second largest uranium producer, sitting on the highest grade deposits on Earth. And the United States, which imports nearly all its uranium, is watching Canada's supply get spoken for. Start with what Canada actually announced. The federal government's new nuclear energy strategy sets out a plan to expand uranium production, develop more domestic nuclear projects, and position Canada as a stronger global supplier of both nuclear fuel and technology. Reuters reported the strategy includes a plan for up to 10 new nuclear reactors. This is a national commitment to grow every part of the nuclear chain at once, mining more uranium, building more reactors, and exporting more fuel and expertise to a world increasingly hungry for clean, reliable power. Canada's starting position is formidable. It is already the world's second largest uranium producer, and its Saskatchewan deposits are among the highest grade uranium reserves anywhere on the planet. High-grade ore means more uranium per ton of rock, which translates into lower production costs and a structural advantage over competitors. That geological endowment is the foundation of the entire strategy. Canada is not trying to build a uranium industry from nothing. It is expanding an industry that already ranks among the most important in the world, backed by reserves that few other nations can match. The biggest part of the story is where Canada has decided to send its uranium. In March 2026, Cameco Canada's uranium giant signed a roughly $2.6 billion 9-year uranium supply agreement with India. The deal covers nearly 22 million pounds of uranium beginning in 2027. That is an enormous long-term commitment, locking a large share of future Canadian production to a single, fast-growing customer. And it was signed as part of a broader effort by Canada and India to deepen their economic partnership, connecting the uranium deal to a wider trade relationship between the two countries. India's nuclear ambitions explain why the agreement matters so much. India is planning a massive expansion of nuclear power, targeting 100 gigawatts of capacity by 2047. Reaching that target will require an enormous and sustained supply of uranium fuel. And Canada has now positioned itself as a key supplier for that expansion. The 9-year Cameco agreement is the opening chapter of what could become a decades-long relationship, giving Canada a major new customer at precisely the moment countries around the world are competing for secure sources of nuclear fuel. That competition is where America enters the picture. The United States remains heavily dependent on imported uranium. U.S. nuclear operators received 36% of their uranium deliveries from Canada in 2024, making Canada the single largest source of American uranium. And the dependence on foreign supply overall is nearly total. The U.S. Energy Information Administration reported that American nuclear generators imported about 99% of the uranium concentrate they used in 2020. 3. The United States produces almost none of its own uranium fuel domestically, relying instead on Canada and a handful of other suppliers to keep its reactors running. Here is where the framing has to be precise. Canada's India deal will not suddenly shut down American reactors. The United States has existing supply contracts and multiple sources, and one agreement with India does not sever the flow of Canadian uranium south. The real story is more subtle and more important. Canada's growing list of international customers means competition for future uranium supplies is intensifying. As Canada commits large volumes to India and other buyers, the global market for secure nuclear fuel tightens, and the United States finds itself competing for supply at exactly the moment it is trying to rebuild its own fuel chain from a position of near total import dependence. And if you want the real story behind how Canada is still holding its ground through tariffs, wars, and hard times, hit join below to join the membership for exclusive documentaries you won't see anywhere else about Canada's progress and rise through uncertainty. The timing collides with a surge in American electricity demand. U.S. power consumption is rising sharply, driven by data centers, artificial intelligence computing, and new industrial projects. Nuclear power is central to meeting that demand because it provides reliable, carbon-free baseload electricity that intermittent sources cannot match. Technology giants have been signing major nuclear supply agreements to power their AI operations. But every new reactor and every extended reactor life requires uranium fuel, and America imports 99% of what it uses. Rising demand meets constrained domestic supply at the worst possible moment. Washington has recognized the vulnerability and is racing to address it. The U.S. Department of Energy awarded $2.7 billion to restore American uranium enrichment capacity, part of a broader push to rebuild a domestic nuclear fuel supply chain and reduce dependence on foreign sources, particularly Russia, which has historically dominated global enrichment. That investment reflects an urgent recognition that relying on imports for 99% of nuclear fuel is a strategic weakness. But rebuilding a domestic enrichment and fuel production industry takes years, and in the interim, the United States remains dependent on imports, with Canada as its largest supplier. This is the emerging North American nuclear power race. The United States is investing billions to restore domestic enrichment and build a stronger fuel supply chain, while Canada is simultaneously expanding both its uranium production and its nuclear technology. The two countries are moving in parallel, but Canada holds something America urgently needs. It has abundant, high-grade uranium, an established nuclear industry, and access to multiple international markets. America has enormous demand, a near total import dependence, and a fuel chain it is still rebuilding. That asymmetry is the heart of the story. Canada's diversification strategy is what gives Ottawa potential leverage. The country's energy regulator has documented how Canadian uranium exports help fuel nuclear generation around the world, framing uranium as part of Canada's broader push toward energy security and export diversification. By developing customers like India alongside its existing relationships, Canada reduces its dependence on any single buyer, including the United States. A supplier with many customers holds more bargaining power than one tied to a single market, and Canada is deliberately building that optionality into its uranium strategy. The key question is whether this new strategy could give Canada greater bargaining power over the nuclear fuel that powers America's reactors. As U.S. electricity demand climbs from data centers and AI, and as American reactors continue depending on imported uranium, Canada's position as the largest supplier, now with a growing roster of international customers, becomes more significant. If future uranium supplies grow scarcer and competition intensifies, the country holding the highest grade reserves and the largest export relationship with the United States gains influence over a fuel that American energy security increasingly depends on. The honest framing is the strongest one. Canada is not directly threatening America's nuclear grid today. What is happening is more consequential over the long term. Canada is becoming a nuclear fuel powerhouse at the same moment America is trying to end its dependence on foreign uranium. Those two trajectories are on a collision course. Canada is expanding production, signing long-term international deals, and building reactors, while the United States scrambles to rebuild a domestic fuel chain it let atrophy for decades. The pieces are all in motion. Canada holds the world's highest grade uranium and ranks as its second largest producer. It has committed nearly 22 million pounds to India over 9 years and set out a strategy for up to 10 new reactors. The United States imports 99% of its uranium concentrate, gets more of it from Canada than anywhere else, and faces surging electricity demand from AI and data centers. Washington is spending $2.7 billion to rebuild domestic enrichment, but that will take years. In the gap between America's rising nuclear demand and its constrained domestic supply sits Canada, the neighbor with the uranium, the industry, and an expanding list of other customers willing to pay for it.